Hi there, this is DM Nell, and I am in the process of preparing for my follow-up to the Shadow of the Demon Lord, Tales of the Demon Lord campaign adventure, Born to Die. I ran part one in my last session, and I actually had planned on it being a one-session adventure because it's very short, and it's actually like a page or let's see here. It's 2 pages in the campaign book. So really the majority of the information that's provided here isn't even the adventure. It's basically just background information and information on the NPCs involved. So I really had wanted to get this done in one session because it's pretty short and sweet, but unfortunately, my players wanted to do some shopping before they actually got into the adventure. So, spent basically half of the last session in crossings, getting rid of some stuff, buying some stuff, and then taking care of a few things while they waited for their ally, um, the fighter, or sorry, not the fighter, but the warrior character, Kane Arroway, was actually out on a job with his father for a few days, and so the PCs had a few days to kill. During this time, they went ahead and did the shopping that I mentioned already. They also had to care for Father Gregory. Now, Father Gregory, if you watch the first couple of videos, was the victim of an organ filch. An organ filch is a creature that was summoned by a demonologist in the Morehouse, which is this structure right here, and was trapped basically in the cellar of this house until somebody set it free. So the PCs had gone into the house looking for Father Gregory, or looking for clues about Father Gregory's disappearance, and they ended up finding him, fighting the organ filch and ghoul as well. But they found Father Gregory. He was in a bad way. He was missing an arm, missing a leg, missing his tongue, and his mind wasn't there. He was crazed because of the ordeal he'd gone through. So the PCs took him from there, and they really didn't want to alert the church or the Brown Cloaks about what had happened to Father Gregory because of the suspicious nature of their lack of wanting Sergeant Elise to investigate his disappearance. Somebody went through some pretty good lengths to prevent him from being found, and so this raised some suspicions with the PCs. They decided to take Father Gregory to one of their houses, and really the only one that has a house is Kane Arroway, who lives in the basement of his parents' house. And so they took him there initially. But then Arroway had to go on a job with his father the following day. So the next day they took Father Gregory to Sergeant Elise, who is a brown cloak. And she's the one that asked the Goliath character, not Goliath, the Jotun character, Mathias, to investigate his disappearance because she was being forbidden to do so. And so Mathias took Father Gregory over to her house, and she agreed to watch him until they could figure out what the best thing to do for him is. So while they did that, after they did that, I should say, they just the rest of the PCs that didn't go on the job just stayed in town and spent the next few days doing some things. The following day, they actually took the father to Mercy Hill, which is an asylum, figuring that that's probably the best place to care for him since he was acting crazy with Sergeant Elise. And so she feared for his safety if somebody professionally trained in how to handle the mentally incompetent cared for him. And so they took him over to the asylum. And that's pretty much what they did on day one. Day two, they went around town selling some stuff and buying some stuff. Finding out the properties of the enchanted items that they had found inside the Morehouse. On day 3, they decided to go back to the Morehouse, which at the end of the Morehouse session, they learned that it had caught fire and was burning down. So they had waited a couple days for the fire to die out, and decided to go back and investigate because they had found a tunnel in the cellar, but they hadn't had a chance to actually follow the tunnel, see where it leads. So they're curious about that. They made their way into the house, back into the cellar, found the tunnel, and they discovered that it led to another abandoned building in the area, which is apparently one of the ways that the Organ Filch and possibly even the ghoul came and went without being seen from the Morehouse. So on the 4th day in the morning, a couple things happened. Mathias was kindly told by John Crowley, the leader of the Brown Cloaks, that since his tour duty was over, he really needed to vacate the Brown Cloaks headquarters, which is where he's been shacking up, and basically have some room for new recruits. So as Mathias was packing his things up, he had a visitor come see him, and the visitor was one of the councilmen of the City Council of Crossings, by the name of Master Green. Now, Master Green is a merchant, and he represents the merchants on the City Council. Master Green approached Mathias because he did not want to involve Brown Cloaks in a situation that he had involving his daughter. The Brown Cloaks are the police force of Crossings, and Master Green explained that his daughter had been kidnapped and a ransom note had been left, basically instructing him not to involve the Brown Cloaks or any other authorities, otherwise his daughter would be killed. They were ransoming his daughter, and they wanted him to pay 100 silver shillings for her return. And there was an arrangement on where to make the drop-off and all that stuff in the note. So Master Green had heard about the Goliath. Wow, I keep calling it Goliath. Too much D&D in my head. So the Jotun, by the name of Mathias, Master Green had heard of him and heard that he was retiring from his year of service with the Brown Cloaks. And so Master Green had gone to him in hopes of recruiting him in helping to recover his missing daughter. So Master Green read him the note, explained the situation, told him that he could keep the 100 silver shillings as long as he returned his daughter safely, and that the people who took his daughter, which is apparently a gang by the name of the Rude Boys, and that's also the gang that was guarding the Morehouse and the PCs that encountered them in the previous session. The Rude Boys had been the ones that kidnapped his daughter, and he doesn't know why they kidnapped her, but he does want her back. So he's hiring Mathias. Mathias was a bit reluctant at first, but the 100 silver shillings, I think, won him over. So he took that offer and went to his other 2 allies that were still in town, the 2 dwarves, Ekna and Gruntbelly, and they agreed to join him on the recovery of the daughter, whose name is what is her name? Candace Green. And so Candace, her disappearance required that Master Green make a drop-off at a specific place at midnight that night. And so the PCs agreed to make, or basically watch him make the drop-off, and then find out who picks up the money, follow them, and try to get his daughter back. So they had made this plan with Master Green to follow him to the old fishery, which is a brothel that's here in Tankards. I believe this building right here. And there's an alley right next door to it. And so the PCs decided to watch from an inn across the street that Master Green had rented for them, that had a window facing the alley where he was going to make a drop. So all this was prearranged. The PCs met him later that night, and they went to the room, watched him make the drop off. He waited around for a little bit, but nobody showed. So when he left, a few minutes later, a dark figure came kind of stumbling through the alley, picked up the money, and left. And the figure turned out to be a clockwork man that seemed to be having difficulty walking properly. But the clockwork man made his way down the docks, and the PCs followed him. And he went to one of the piers that was dark and not abandoned, but just not being used at this time of night because it was after midnight. And the clockwork man dropped the money off with two individuals. One was in a rowboat, and the other one was actually up on the dock. So the clockwork man was making the exchange. The PCs decided to get the drop on these people since they didn't know that they were being followed. So Kane Arroway made the first attack with his ranged weapon. He's an archer, so he fired an arrow at the person on the dock, and then Mathias began to charge down the dock. I gave them essentially a free round to do this since it was something that was quite unexpected. And unfortunately, it wasn't a very effective free round. I don't think either of them did much, if any, damage to either of the rude boys that were at the dock. The clockwork man just kind of stood there frozen, kind of freaked out by what was happening. And when Mathias came up and started pounding away on the rude boy on the dock, the clockwork man just kind of started backing out of the situation, as begging not to be hit, and just kind of extracted himself. And so then a fight broke out. The two dwarves came charging down the dock. Kane fired some more arrows, managed to kill the one in the boat. Then Mathias, actually I can't remember if Kane killed him or if Mathias did by jumping down the boat, but I believe the Jotun jumped down on the boat, and I can't remember if the guy was dead at that point or if him jumping down killed him. But anyway, they did kill the guy in the boat, but they did not kill the other one. The other one, who we'll call Red, because he had red hair and freckles, he was quite young, said, after being pointedly questioned, said that the girl was being held on an island out here in the Dark Waters. Now, the Dark Waters is a lake that the town of Crossings is situated on, and there's lots of islands. They're actually called fairy islands because there's lots of fairy relics and ruins that are found on these islands, and sometimes fairies themselves. And so Red said that there was an island not far out that the girl was being kept by several of the rude boys, 9 altogether. And so the PCs decided to jump in the boat. Actually, Mathias decided to swim behind the boat. Kane Arroway, the archer warrior, would get in the boat behind Red, who would be pointing the direction on where to go. And then the two dwarves would be hunkered down in the rowboat as well, hidden. And so they made their way to the island. It's dark. Basically, the only thing lighting the waters and the island is moonlight. And as they approached the beach, they saw one figure on the beach who called out to the rowboat. And Kane fired an arrow at the guy on the beach. Now, the player that runs Kane decided he was going to use a rule that hadn't been tested yet, and it's a rule in the Shadow of the Demon Lord combat that is called a called shot. Now, anybody that's played D&D for more than a couple of editions has heard the term called shot before, and basically what it is a way of specifying a body part that you want to attack in order to have a specific effect on the person when they're hit. So I am looking the attack up, but basically the called shot that Kane Arroway had wanted to make was a cold shot to the throat to prevent the rude boy that's on the beach from yelling out and alerting the other 8 rude boys that are further in the island. They're more in the center of the island. And so the player rolled very well. I can't remember what he rolled, but it was very high. And he was successful, even though the called shot requires that you make the attack roll with 2 Banes. And despite the 2 Banes, he rolled extremely well. And so it wasn't enough damage to kill the rude boy, but it needed to have a good effect since it hit his throat. So what I ruled was that basically he shot the arrow as the guy turned his head, and the arrow basically sliced through the front part of his throat, severing some of his throat tissue and basically preventing him from screaming out. So, the rude boy is pretty much in shock, just grabbing his throat, blood squirting out and unable to make any sounds. The rest of the guys basically charged the beach and pounded the guy dead. So that's where we left off with the first session. We were just starting to get into the meat of it, but we ran out of time at that point. So, all of this was done on this page, on this map, and with the Theater of the Mind style of play. Now, I do have these miniatures out here, mostly so that the PCs know who is involved in this combat. It wasn't for positioning or anything like that, because there's no grid on here, and there's no dock, obviously, so it's just the miniatures. But everything else was described verbally and took place in everybody's heads, with only this map and the miniature to be their visual representation. So that's where we left off, and the next session, actually that session was about a week and a half ago. We had to miss last Tuesday because it was Valentine's Day, and I didn't want any of my friends or myself to be divorced from playing a role-playing game on Valentine's Day. So we decided to skip last Tuesday, and we're going to play this next coming Tuesday. And so we'll pick up this Born to Die Part 2, where the players or the characters will confront the rude boys and Candace and find that she is not what she seems to be. So that is how the last session went down. Now, I wanted to mention a couple of things about the last session that, basically in all of these videos, I want to talk a little bit about, kind of give a DM's commentary of how the session went and things that I learned, things that went well, things that didn't go well, and that sort of thing. So one thing I learned was that my players really like shopping during the game instead of via email. I really kind of tried to spur them to tell me what they were doing while their friend was away on a job, but really couldn't get them to do that via email. So they actually waited till game night, and it took an hour and a half. And it irritates me a little bit, but I understand that they like doing it. So I'm not going to begrudge them that. It's just that we only have 3 hours to play. Even though we play weekly, it's only 3 hours. So I would kind of like to get that in between game stuff handled in between games via email, so that we can actually get to the adventure during the session. But so be it. The players want to do it during the session. That's fine. Another thing that happened was that the players the characters learned what their items qualities were. Now, I think I may have mentioned this in my last video, but I wanted to hand out some enchanted items, even though they weren't in the actual adventure. I did want to give them some items, some magical items, just to kind of, have them reward them for, number one, completing the first adventure of a new game, but number two, to get them to understand how magic items work in this game system. Magic items aren't the same in Shadow of the Demon Lord as there are in D&D, because D&D they have set properties for the most part. You have weapons with magical bonuses. Then you have weapons with specific properties like a Vorpal sword or hammer thunderbolts or just Staff of the Magi. Just a variety of different magic items, but everybody knows pretty much by now what those things, for the most part, what they do, or what they represent. So one thing that I think is cool about the Shadow of the Demon Lord is that there really aren't any set magic items other than relics, and there's not a whole lot of relics that have been outlined in the game as of yet. And the rules provide the game master a means of creating enchanted items using some tables that's in the core rulebook. And the enchanted items can be temporary items having limited uses, or they can be permanent items, just depending on what you roll or what the GM decides to imbue the item with. But the enchanted object or enchanted items information in the rulebook gives you an initial table in which to determine the form of the item. So you can roll 1 through 20, things like light armor, melee weapon, jewelry, furniture, sculpture, coin, clothing, and so on. And then there's another table that you roll on to determine which enchanted object property table you roll to see the property. So there are 5 enchanted property tables. And I believe the higher the number of the table, the more powerful the enchanted item properties become. So I had the PCs or the players roll, and I statted up essentially the few items that they found in the Morehouse. And so one of the items was a skull, and they rolled that it had a permanent property of enhancing perception by 1 point. There was another item which was a green sword made of green metal. Now, this was supposed to be a mundane item in the adventure, but because it's green, it just kind of screams, magic. So I went ahead and had them roll on the enchanted objects table, and it came up with the object vibrates when something's within 100 yards, and I forget which table that was rolled on, but I can tell you this: the thing that the sword vibrates to when it's within 100 yards of it is not what I ended up imbuing the sword with. I knew that there are demons that are in this adventure, or in this campaign. There are lots of demons in this campaign, and demons are pretty badass in this game. So instead of the vibration giving off for whatever it was, I think it was some sort of undead creature. Instead of that, I decided the object would vibrate when within 100 yards of a demon. So it's not a very powerful property. All it does is really just say, hey, there's a demon within 100 yards. It doesn't give you any pluses to hit the demon. It doesn't do any damage or extra damage, or didn't really do anything. It's just a sword. But it's a sword that vibrates whenever a demon's within 100 yards. So I decided to use this for more of a horrific effect, to kind of build some atmosphere and some fear in the players. And so at the end of the last session, when they stormed the beach and killed the rude boy that was on the beach, they came within 100 yards of the other people that were in the center of the island. And at that point, when we left off the session, or we ended the session, the last thing I said was, the green sword is vibrating. And that kind of freaked them out, because now they know that there's a demon somewhere within 100 yards, and they're first level. So they're a little bit concerned about what that means, but I think they'll manage just fine. They may not even encounter the demon, but the demon is there. It's not what they expect to find, and they will find out in the next session. Okay, so what else was there? There was the let's see, the sword, the skull. There was a journal, which has a power which basically allows them to teleport the party. It's a getaway free card, essentially. Single use item lets them teleport away from one place to another place. Once it's used, then that magical property doesn't work anymore. Then the final item was what was it? I forget. The final item was well, it'll come to me. At any rate, so now that they have some magical items to play with, not very powerful, but magical nonetheless. They are opening a new world or a new section of this world to better understand how magic works. Okay. So what else did I want to talk about? Like I said, I really didn't use anything other than this city map here. I did use a scene for when they were in the alley, and basically what I did is I just took a picture off the internet of a dark alley, and in fact, this may be from Shadow of the Demon Lord. I think it is, but anyway, it's really a good dark representation of an alley, and I plastered this up on the screen when they were in the whole alley scene with the drop off and all that. I think it's good to have something for them to look at, even though it's not a grid with figures that they can tell positioning and all that stuff. If they have at least an illustration or something that they can look at to get a feel for what their characters are experiencing, I think it helps immensely get them immersed into the story and into the scene, especially if you're going theater of the mind. It also helps keep people focused if they have something to look at. So that is about the only prop that I used for this session. Don't need any more, so I'm archiving it. So next session, I've got these three maps here lined up, and don't know if they would. Actually, I have one map. This map right here lined up for next session. These next couple of maps are for the following session, which is the Curious Case of the Errant Swine adventure. One thing I totally forgot to mention: the whole situation with Kane Arroway going away on a job with his father. So one thing that this campaign is very light on is hooks on getting the PCs involved in each adventure. And the hook that we have for the Curious Case of the Errant Swine is kind of weak. And I really wanted something a little bit stronger to give the players a reason to go on this adventure. The hook that's in the adventure is that the farmer wants to hire them to solve the mystery of his pigs being his pigs are missing. He's a pig farmer. A couple things don't make sense. Number one, how does a pig farmer have a gold crown to throw away? He must be a pretty damn good pig farmer. Number two, I had established that this town that the pig farmer lives near is 2 days outside of Crossings. So that's a ways to walk for a job that pays one gold crown that they'd have to split. So I wanted a more solid lure or hook to get the players involved. So what that adventure entails is not only missing pigs, but it also entails the nearby Sentinel Forest or Sentinel Wood and a shrine that is located in there, as well as Beastman Cave and some creatures that have escaped from the shrine. And so The hook that I decided to come up with was to involve Kane Arroway with some of the NPCs that are present or presented in this adventure. Now, this adventure has some NPCs that the characters will come across as they're exploring the Sentinel Wood, and they are adventurers themselves that had gone into the wood seeking fairy ruins that they had heard rumors of. And so, what I decided to do was I decided to take those NPCs and use them as a way to get Kane involved with them so that he would have a reason to go searching for them when they turn up missing. So Kane and his father were hired by these four adventurers because these four adventurers come from the East Coast, a different part of the Northern Reach. And they don't know this area, so they needed somebody, a guide, to lead them to the Sentinel Wood so that they could search for fairy ruins. They had apparently found some ruins somewhere else, and that in those ruins there was a something that suggested that there would be more ruins in the Sentinel Wood. They really didn't go into a whole lot of details on that. And so, Kane's father agreed to guide them, and he brought Kane along with him. So I had emailed just this 2 or 3 paragraph synopsis of what happened during the to Kane Arroway during that during the 4 days that the other players were doing their thing here in town. And so it didn't really involve anything other than just transporting the NPCs to the village of Hamlet, then going out to Farmer Ham's farm, introducing him as an NPC, and then going to the edge of the Sentinel Woods, learning that there are beastmen around. And then at that point, the NPCs went into the woods, and Kane and his father turned back and went back to crossings. So what's going to happen is that Father Ham is going to get in contact with Kane's father again, but he's going to basically tell him that one of the people that he had brought to his farm had stumbled back into his farm and was critically injured. Kane should pick up on this because the person that's going to be found is somebody that had flirted with him during this trip to Hamlet, and maybe even had spent the night with him. I kind of left that vague. I didn't want to get too weird. So this will be kind of a hook for Kane to be at least interested in going and taking up Farmer Ham's dilemma with more than just pigs missing. So that is something that I had introduced offline with an email as what that player's character was doing during the time that the others were shopping and doing their thing in town. So I wanted to mention that because it's always good to do a fair bit of foreshadowing and planning ahead to hope that to get your adventures to blend together so that you're not really just kind of throwing something at the PCs that they may or may not be interested in, and then potentially getting completely derailed from the campaign that you have planned. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but this is their first Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign, and I really kind of want to stick to playing by the book and playing through each of these adventures. Once we get through this, if I start another Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign, it can be a little bit more sandboxy, but for this game, I want to pretty much stick it to keep to the rails, and in order to do that and not make it seem like they're being railroaded, have interesting hooks to get them going from adventure to adventure. The other thing I realized in reading some of the other adventures further into the campaign is that there's a lot of NPCs and a lot of bad story hooks that probably aren't going to interest my players. They might interest other people, but my players aren't. They don't really. They need something more compelling than farmer or a pig farmer offering a gold piece to find some missing pigs. So I decided that I'm going to start using some of the NPCs that are in the book, which are a lot, and start introducing them now so that when they hear about them or encounter them or are approached by them later on in the campaign, they've already had that. They already have some familiarity with that NPC. So, for example, we've got the halfling Elder Fob. I'm not sure that they're even going to meet Elder Fob, but he's a main character in the adventure, a mover and shaker of the story, but he's pretty much behind the scenes. And, I know what he's doing, but the players have no clue who this guy is, that he even exists, and what he's doing behind the scenes. So I'm going to have to find some way to have them run across him so that they can at least hear the name and understand who he is, so that when he does appear in a later adventure, they have that connection. There's also, the mayor of Crossings, Katrin Edgerton. There is an NPC that they will meet in a couple adventures from now, Inquisitor Randolphus, who they did hear about. Whenever you say there's an Inquisition in town, that kind of perks players' ears up a bit. So I did. They have heard of Inquisitor Randolphus, but they haven't met him. So I'm going to have him kind of make an appearance at some point before the adventure that they meet him at, and give him kind of an asshole-ish personality, because you can't have an Inquisitor that's nice. Nobody hires a nice Inquisitor. You got to have an asshole as an Inquisitor. So this guy's going to have a pretty big chip on his shoulder, and he's going to be a big prick. So I just have to figure out how to convey that, which isn't difficult for me, but I got to make it funny and interesting and all that stuff. So another NPC that I want to involve is Gundren the Ironmonger. Now, one thing I haven't done so far in this campaign is I have two dwarves, Ekna and Gruntbelly. One is a magician, and the other one is a priest. And I really haven't done much with their backgrounds. I haven't done much with their characters. They're kind of supporting characters at this point. I want to give them more substance. So I need to bring in some NPCs to involve them in as well. And the NPC that I just named, Gundren the Ironmonger, is really the only dwarf NPC that's named in this book. So I'm going to bring him on board as somebody that is familiar with both Gruntbelly and Ekna. And perhaps they came from the same stronghold, or perhaps they have some clan connections, or maybe the two dwarves are doing some work for Gundren. Gundren is a miner, and there's actually an adventure in one of his mines later on in the campaign. So I want to get that connection made before they go to that adventure, and they have something to connect him and them to it, to make it a good, clean, smooth transition to that adventure. So I'm going to find a way to introduce him in the next couple of sessions. I just introduced Master Dreen. I also want to introduce a few other NPCs, Ezekiel. I want to start name dropping some of the scarier NPCs. For example, the vampire Lucretia, who plays a big part in the last adventure of this campaign. I definitely want them to know who the hell she is. So I'm going to start dropping some pretty serious clues and foreshadowing of Lucretia. I've already dropped her name once, but I've dropped so many names at this point that I think that it's kind of their eyes are kind of glazed over, and the names are just bouncing off them. So I want to cement this name as an important person, a scary person, and a person that has some power. that they need to watch out for. And finally, Charybdis. Now, Charybdis is the named wizard of the adventure. He lives in Wizard's Peak, which is a tower, the only wizard's tower in town. And so I want to introduce him as well. I'm trying to figure out what personality to give him. Now, the book says that he has an unhinged personality. It talks about how he, how he dresses, but it really doesn't go a whole lot into his actual personality. I'm not really sure what unhinged translates into as far as an actual person, other than somebody that's maybe a little bit loopy. But at any rate, I want to figure out a good personality for Charybdis because, again, Wizard's Peak as Tower plays a pretty significant role in this. And I believe that the dwarf wizard Gruntbelly has a connection with Charybdis, perhaps as an apprentice, or maybe he was an apprentice and now he's not. I need to really clarify that with the player. But anyway, those are the NPCs that I really want to start building backgrounds and interactions with throughout this campaign. All right, so that is pretty much it for this video. I'm having fun with this. I think my players are. I'm really anxious to get them leveled up and get them starting to customize their characters and making some really interesting choices to to get them to really develop as unique characters. Right now they're kind of vanilla, so I really want to get some flavor other than vanilla going with these guys. So anyway, I will make another video after we finish the next session, and I also do a write-up on my blogger site and post it on the couple of Google Plus communities. I'm involved in the Shadow of the Demon Lord community, obviously. And so I usually post my my blog there, and I also post this video, these videos there. And then there's another community that I interact with quite a bit, which is Game Master's Journey, which is the community that's led by Lex Starwalker, who has a podcast called Game Master's Journey. He has other podcasts as well, but this community is based off of his Game Master's Journey podcast. But it's a great community, as is the Shadow of the Demon Lord community. And so I post my blog from my sessions, as well as my video blog, my vblog, on those sessions, or on those communities. I try to do it weekly. I'm running a little bit behind because it was a pretty busy week. But at any rate, when I do my next video, I will post both my blog and my video blog for how that went, and hopefully get started on the Errant Swine, which will probably last at least a couple of sessions. So I'm really looking forward to the next couple of sessions, and I hope that they go well. I think they will. All right, so that's it for tonight, and I will see you on the other side of the next session.